For our afternoon, we have Dr. Meagan Hamilton here, faculty advisor from the University of Toronto Indigenous Research Network, to tell us a little bit more about the network and resources and supports here at U of T. So I'll hand it over to Meagan.
Yawa, Saigo Sara Guego, Gagwerianta Meagan Hamilton ni Jungyets, Waginyato, Ganyagahaga ni Wagahonchoda, St. George Danu Oswego, Ganagale, and Wagatanuni Jigon Idawas. Yeah, nice to meet you all. My name is Meagan Hamilton, also Gagwerianta, which means she plants trees in the Mohawk language. And I am Mohawk on my mom's side and settler Irish on my dad's side. My Indigenous community is Six Nations of the Grand River, pretty close to here. I don't know, has anyone ever been to Six Nations? Any hands? One? Okay, one person. So about an hour and 15 minutes away from here when there isn't heavy traffic. On other days, it can be 4 hours. I was formerly the managing director of the Indigenous Research Network, and as of January, I moved into a new faculty role with the Center for Indigenous Studies and also the School of Environment. Can everyone hear me okay? Also, Dale Turner is the director of the Indigenous Research Network. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. He suddenly had a dental emergency. But Dale is senior advisor to the provost on Indigenous research. He is a professor in political science in the Center for Indigenous Studies. And together, for the last 2 years, we have been working on further developing the Indigenous Research Network at U of T. It started with Dr. Suzanne Stewart, who really got it off the ground and developed a strategic plan. And we have continued on with that vision and to grow a network of a place where Indigenous scholars, where other allied scholars can come to and be connected to research topics that meets the needs of Indigenous communities. So we sort of think of ourselves as a somewhat service of matchmaking between researchers and Indigenous organizations or communities, where we can introduce, but not do all of the work behind that. We expect that researchers themselves will work hard to create relationships with their partners, and but we are there to support, and we're also there to help support faculty that are already doing Indigenous research, particularly Indigenous faculty at U of T, and getting their research out across the tri-campuses, highlighting the important work that they're doing and how that connects to other researchers at U of T. Sorry, this is a clicker. So the Indigenous Research Network sits under the Office of Indigenous Initiatives, which supports mostly staff at U of T, but also supports student services through First Nations House, and yeah, is leading the supervision of the Indigenous Research Network. It's a little bit about Dale's role. The IRN started as a institutional strategic initiative, ISI, at U of T, and is now moved to a permanent office within the Office of the Provost. So that is something that has just happened recently and is very encouraging to know that there is yeah, support from the provost office to have this kind of a permanent office, to perhaps establish other offshoots of that, like a permanent Indigenous research ethics board, perhaps. That is one of the visions of Dr. Dale Turner, who sits on the REB at U of T Research Ethics Board, and takes on a lot of the work amongst other senior Indigenous scholars at U of T, to review any proposals that come into the Research Ethics Board. And when they see on that proposal, that little checkbox, are you working with Indigenous peoples? That is then routed to often senior Indigenous scholars at U of T, where they review and determine whether the research proposal is ethically sound, whether the researchers have done the work to create connections and collaborations and identified benefit to community partners and organizations. And that really needs to be a permanent office as well. We're hoping that that might be something that would happen with the IRN soon. But the vision for the IRN has been to become a leading and comprehensive Indigenous research network that brings together Indigenous researchers, knowledge keepers, community members, and allies. Oh. So as well as just at U of T, we are looking to build a global Indigenous research network. U of T is a very globally focused research institute, and the IRN also wants, to reflect that. So we developed 3 strategic pillars, and one of them was to grow that international Indigenous collaboration. So the other 2 were that we would amplify Indigenous-led research across the tri-campuses and help mobilize some of that research. And so that has led, just going to keep going. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, I think. Sorry. That has led us on some adventures over the past year. So in 2025, we traveled abroad to start to develop some of these international collaborations through our International Indigenous Research Consortium. And that really came out of a conference that is held each year called NASA, which is a gathering of Indigenous Studies program educators. And it is based out of North America, but it attracts Indigenous scholars globally. And many, many, many collaborations are made there. And so there were scholars identified that for us to start working with right away. And we also looked at U of T's partnerships that it has with other universities and whether they have Indigenous studies programs. So the first trip, Dale went to U Melbourne, and they have a much more established Indigenous studies program there. And you can see they have a large building that is completely for Indigenous studies and scholarship. A little different than where we sit at North Borden, one of the oldest and most decrepit buildings on campus. But it has just been announced that we will have a new building in probably about 4 years. And that's, yeah, very, very encouraging. So Dale visited, their Indigenous Knowledge Center as well, and has been working with scholars there on applying to a Horizon Research or Horizon Europe grant, and mostly around topics of how do we create shared courses on Indigenous research, methodologies through global classrooms, and that rather than us each having courses at our institution that are globally focused, why don't we do it together and we highlight all of our researchers? The second trip came out of a relationship with Rauna Korkoken, who was a visiting Sami scholar at U of T for a year, I think in 2024, and newly appointed senior scholar in political science who came from UBC, Dr. Cheryl Lightfoot. Cheryl Lightfoot works for with the oh my gosh, the UN. I want to say the IRN. Cheryl Lightfoot works for the UN and is a very well-known Indigenous scholar and very much focused on research with Sami in Norway and Finland. So I was lucky enough to go on that trip, went with Cheryl. I can't imagine if I had have went by myself because Cheryl knows Sapmi, which is Sami territory, very well. At the day we arrived, she had written a UN paper the day before about how a new wind power project that the Norwegian government had approved of had not consulted with any of the Sami people, and that the Norwegian government had publicly stated that they don't need to do that. And she wrote an article saying that as per the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, yes, they need to do that. And it was very controversial, and it was a great kind of way for us to be going into Sami communities because they all knew that Cheryl wrote this paper and were quite happy about it. And yeah, it was a great trip. So the interesting part of that is we went to both Sami parliaments in Norway and Finland. We learned about their Indigenous research ethics protocols. They have pretty well-established protocols. That's something that hasn't happened yet at U of T, and that would be another goal of the IRN to develop. The third trip, oh, the picture got, I don't know what happened. Can you see the picture? Oh, that's too bad. So a PhD student, a Quechua PhD student, Indira Quintasio Orozco, who works with the IRN, she went back home to Peru, and she started developing connections with Quechua scholars and particularly focused on Quechua language teaching. And that is another major focus of the IRN, is how do we integrate Indigenous languages into, how do we encourage researchers to integrate that work into their research? And that could really, be anything. It could be in your research where there's impetus to include, words in our language, meanings and understandings of how we see the world, and that's one of the most asked for, I would say, research interests from communities, from Indigenous communities, is that wanting to revitalize and build into research projects the language component, and involve knowledge holders around language speakers. Yeah. And then our last trip this year was to Taiwan, and to 3 different universities there that have very long-standing Indigenous studies programs and also language programs. And that actually led to those scholars coming to visit us at U of T as well, multiple times. They came twice in 1 year. So there's a very strong interest at U of T in promoting connections between Taiwan universities that U of T has partnerships with. And yeah, it's in Taiwan, there's a lot of research funding that is set aside for Indigenous research and for Indigenous scholars to lead that work. I would say that in terms of language, materials development and programs, Taiwan's Indigenous communities and Indigenous studies programs are much more well established than anything across Turtle Island. Their government has put a lot of money towards these efforts, and it really shows. Every Taiwanese student in school learns the local Indigenous language of their community. Yeah, so they came and visited us, and we also took them on a 4-day land-based learning workshop to Dale Turner's Indigenous community in Dakimanan or Temagami First Nation, their territory, and the workshops were led by Dale's community members. And it was great at a place called Camp Wanapate. There was about 80 of us, and it was a really great opportunity. So that happened in September, and we will be offering it again this September. It's open to anyone, any staff, student, faculty that want to come on the trip. People signed up very quickly, and the spots were filled extremely quickly. So the way you can hear about that is on the IRN's website or social media pages. It's around the 2nd or 3rd week of September, but a great opportunity to engage in workshops that are focused on Tameogama understandings of their territory, of health, of research that is happening in collaboration with their community members, of some of the challenges they've had with the logging companies. They went to the Supreme Court and lost against a logging company. And there's a big, history there of working with non-Indigenous research and Indigenous researchers, but particularly the setting of Camp Wanapate is a kids camp that is led by non-Indigenous settlers, and they have worked really hard to create over it's an intergenerational camp. The family, it's been the family for I think 4 generations, and they have all been very close with Tameogama community members. When the logging happened, they gave the community access through the camp. There was a quick route to get to some of the main sites of where the logging trucks were coming in. So the community was staying at the camp and then able to go there really quickly to shut down the road for the logging trucks. And so they have a great relationship, and it's really beautiful to see and to hear and witness that relationship. And yeah, I think that Yawa, that's how we say thank you. It's Haudenosaunee or Miigwech amongst Anishinaabe. You might have heard some of those words before. Any questions on the IRN or some of the things that we do? So we often have researchers approach us who are interested in collaborating with Indigenous communities, and they might have, made a relationship, and they want to ask, how are they taking the right approach? They're often looking for approval in that way. We can't really give it to them, but we can point them to resources, and we can encourage, the ethical ways of working together. And some of the work has already started, and then they're coming to us. Communities come to us who have research going on in their community. They want to share what's happening, and a lot of it we've had with the ISIs. There was a great project shared at one of the gatherings. Yeah, that was do you remember that project where you no, this was another one. It was I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the scholar, but it was a great example of a really good partnership in health research with non-Indigenous researcher and Indigenous community, and they were developing really good resources together that were building awareness of their project. Yep. Oh, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, thank you. For sure. Please, research. I'm now an advisor, but the IRN has a info at IRN email, and you can ask questions or set up a meeting with one of our staff there, and go from there. And no question is, a silly question. It's a pretty safe space to ask, whatever you're curious about, and please do so. Thanks.